Welcome to the Genetics Podcast. Today's guest on the podcast is Adelina Chalmers, who I've known for 2 or 3 years now from her work in Cambridge and London and across the UK, working with tech companies and startups to help their engineers and managers better communicate with one another. Adelina is also one of the hosts of a very popular podcast for startups and scale-ups called Scaling, Failing, Prevailing, which I was on in the past, but this is not the topic that we're going to cover today. We might touch on this, but today we're actually going to talk about COVID-19 and Adelina's experience with COVID-19. So Adelina had COVID-19 about 8 weeks ago and is still recovering today. And so we're going to talk about what it's like to experience it from her perspective and have a little bit of a firsthand view. So Adelina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Patrick, and thank you for asking me to speak about this very, very important topic.
Great. So just to start off, I was hoping maybe we could start with your firsthand experience. So in the media and online, people keep talking about whether this is like the flu. Is it a regular flu? Is it worse? I was wondering if we could just talk about what it was like for you. Was it serious, mild? What kind of issues or complications did you have?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that I think that COVID-19 was missold to me as the flu as well before I got it. I had a moderate to severe case of COVID-19, which means that I was breathless even when sitting down. It was an absolute roller coaster ride. I was very lucky because I have a couple of friends who are doctors. One was more experienced with COVID than the other. And one was from abroad, and they told me to count the days. So the moment symptoms start, you start counting the days. You know, you hear people online going day 1, day 2, day 9, day 10. That's the reason they do that, because initially, at least, symptoms were quite linear in the sense of you could identify almost to the day what symptoms you should be having today if you were a moderate
really?
or
So
severe
what was
case.
that in the beginning?
Yeah. So for me, I had fever for the first 3 days. I was red like a lobster. And fever was going on for about 8 hours a day for 3 days. It wasn't painful or anything like that, but it was just insanely hot. You felt like you were burning up from the inside out. And then my friend, who's a doctor, said to me, if on day 6 you still have fever, regardless how long it goes, you need to get checked by the doctors, because if you get fever from day 8, 7, 8, 9, it means that you could have developed pneumonia and you could end up in intensive care within 48 hours. And right. I think, without having to speak for Boris Johnson himself, I think what I heard happened to him through the grapevine, not through the professional media, is that his doctor did tell him to go and have himself checked out on day 7. But he apparently is an alcoholic and didn't want to do that, and left it too late until day 10, when then he ended up in intensive care.
Right. Did you end up in intensive care, or you were able to pick it out sooner?
No, luckily. So what happened with me is that I had fever for the first 3-4 days, about 7-8 hours a day. And then I felt my lungs being hollow. I just felt them. When I went for a walk, I remember just getting a bit breathless and heart palpitations. And I thought, maybe this is it. Because at the time, I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Because I had been in the sun. I initially thought I had a sunstroke. And then on day 4, I believe, in the morning, I was fine. And by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I couldn't breathe anymore. It was that quick. It was literally, I couldn't really? breathe anymore. Like, literally, I felt like I was choking. Initially, I felt like I was choking when I was talking to somebody. I remember I was on the phone with a friend at the time, and I was telling her how fine I feel, and I'm going to be one of these people who rides it out. Oh, maybe it's not even COVID. I remember saying to her, it's just fine. And literally, within minutes, as the conversation progressed with her, because it was like an hour conversation, by the end of the conversation, I just felt like I was choking. And that was, I remember, on day 4. And then day 5, I just couldn't breathe properly. If I went to the toilet, it felt like I was running a marathon. And it was, right. If I was sitting down completely still and not watched a movie that excited me in any way at all, then I could breathe okay. But any excitement, standing up, watching something that makes me laugh, watching something that makes me cry, any movement from ground zero, essentially, you were choking. It was like, couldn't quite get enough air in.
And how long did that last? So 3 days, 4 days, 4.5 days of fever, or 3.5 days, and then how long of breathing?
So on day 6, on day 6 it got really bad. On day 6, my heart rate doubled, and I know this because one of my friends, who's an engineer, gave me a pulse oximeter, and this is actually one of the tips I'd like to share with the people listening. Please, if you can, buy a pulse oximeter. On Amazon, there's one for like £22. Look at the ones with the most reviews, I would say. Pulse oximeters tell you your heart rate, but they also tell you how much oxygen you have in your bloodstream. And when you can't breathe, or you feel you can't breathe, that's really important. Because if that oxygen level goes under, my doctor friend said under 93. Some people said under 92, but anyway, if it's under 95, you need to keep a close eye on it.
Speak
and definitely
to someone, yeah.
Yes, because that means your lung capacity is going down, and it could go down really quickly, even worse.
What was this was 8 weeks ago now, the testing and the general preparedness is better now, but it's still not great. What was it like then? Were you referred to anyone who could help you figure out what was going on, get testing, anything like that?
No, so it's a very good question. Everybody thought I had been tested, but I haven't, even now. So on day 6, my breathing got so bad, we had to call the paramedics out because I felt I couldn't breathe anymore. Interestingly, I had kept a chart of my pulse oximeter readings throughout the days from day 1 when it started. But on this, when I couldn't breathe anymore, I just ignored everything. I ignored the pulse oximeter and called the ambulance because it just couldn't breathe anymore. I just felt like I was choking. And it, they do say that if you feel like you're choking, you have to call. I called 111 initially, but they put me on hold and they said, I can't get you to see someone soon enough. You have to hang up and call again. I was just like, when you can't think anymore, I didn't even understand what you were saying. Like, it was just surreal. An ambulance came out and they listened to my lungs, literally, like on one side of my back and the other side, and they said, "Oh, you're fine. You just need to calm down. You just had an episode, a breathing episode, but you're fine. Your lungs are fine." And then I found out that essentially at that time, paramedics didn't have enough information or training to know what to do about it. So they just said to me, they just left me at home. They didn't take me in for checkups, and they should have apparently taken me in for checkups. But it's not their fault. They just didn't know at the time. It's apparently my pulse oximeter said that my blood oxygenation was fine at the time. So I wasn't tested. They barely had any equipment for people as well. I felt so sorry for them. They only had like a face mask on and like one of the plastic aprons on, and that was it. And so then the weird thing that happened was that on day 10, I literally at 5 p.m., I remember perfectly, day 10, I had like a button switch. And it was like 5 minutes ago, I couldn't breathe when I spoke. And now I feel absolutely fine. And I literally went for a walk the next day. And then the day after that, I was getting even better. So 48 hours, just like switch. And that was it. I was better. And I thought, oh, this is it. Perfect. And then
in the clear, I beat it. Yeah.
Yes. And then literally 48 hours later, to the hour, I started having fever again. I started getting worse again. By which point on day 14, my doctor sent me to hospital, referred me to hospital. And that's when I ended up on the COVID ward in hospital. And they didn't test me then either because they said they didn't have tests. They said that they would only test if I was like a person with cancer or something like that. And that's the only kind of people they would test at the time because they were saying, you sound like you have COVID and that's it. We can't say any more.
Right. The test is not going to tell us anything we don't already know. Yeah.
No. And they tested lots of things. They tested my breathing. They tested my oxygen levels, my heart rate. And that's where they discovered, they did urine tests, and that's when they discovered that my kidneys had effectually started getting an infection, and I had blood in my urine and a list of many, many other things that I couldn't read. I didn't understand what they meant.
Did you experience anything like loss of smell or any of the other somewhat unexpected things that are now starting to pop up?
I had a bit of loss of smell, but to be honest with you, I couldn't eat most of the day. So I think I kind of remember feeling that nothing is tasty or interesting. So probably that was the loss of taste and smell. The other thing that I had was very vivid dreams. And it was interesting because I was extremely calm. I mean, to be honest, I had to be, because if you weren't calm, you were wouldn't be able to breathe, literally.
Right.
And I'm trying to think if there was, but I remember heart palpitations I got as well. So when I started feeling better again, my heart would just beat uncontrollably for half an hour to an hour, 2 hours sometimes. And then that would go away. And that's just me sitting on the sofa being as calm as I humanly can, meditating. And my heart was just beating out of my chest.
So that's day 10. Now we're on day 56.
Yes, yeah.
Something like that, right?
So day 14, I ended up in hospital. And in hospital, they gave me a horse-sized dose of antibiotics, which cleared the kidney infection, luckily. And then I started getting better again. I haven't had any fever since. But again, like you say, day 56. So I had waves, exactly like the 48-hour wave that I told you about. After I got out of hospital, got the antibiotics, slowly started feeling better. And then literally you would think you're getting better because you can breathe now, when you stand up or when you go up the stairs to your bedroom or whatever. And you think, oh, I'm getting better, but it's not linear. You just have this kind of sliding scale where you feel better and better and better. To when you reach a point and you think, I'm 90% there, I'm 99% there. I feel I could work, I remember 5 hours a day, and I did an hour's walk. I was like, wow, I'm getting back to normal levels. Close enough anyway. And then literally the next day, collapse. Can't walk for longer than 5 minutes, can't work at all, or a maximum of 2 hours. It's not linear at all.
Do you feel like it's something in your lungs or body that is just going to take some time to repair itself? Is that? Yes.
So in the first few days, it felt like my lungs were hollow. Then it felt like my eyes were made of my lungs were made of iron. They felt heavier and heavier, and they felt shrinking. In the first week, my lungs felt like they were shrinking as days went on. Now it just feels that they're heavy again, but not heavy in the same way. It's so hard to explain. So they feel cloudy, and I feel like I can't quite get enough oxygen still. If I go for a walk, this is the thing that shocked me the most. You think you're better because yesterday you could walk for an hour. So today you go for another walk, and after 5 minutes you realize you have to turn back because you're not going to make it to the end of the road. And it's this lack of consistency that frightens me, to be honest. I tell people I'm fine, and then tomorrow I'm not fine again. And I feel like I'm continuously lying to people. It's because you were fine 2 hours ago. Yeah, not anymore. And that's very odd.
Yeah, well, and the general lack of predictability of who has a moderate case, who has a severe case, who has a mild case. I think that's one of the challenging parts as well. I mean, would you, if you were to predict from the beginning, you'd have no way of knowing whether you'd be perfectly mild and go right through it, or whether you'd have an 8-week saga, right? And that's one of the scary parts. Does your experience with that give you any perspective on how we should be treating this crisis for the next, coming months, years? Because I think a lot of people, having not experienced it, will say, I'd like to just get get it over with and get out into society. I don't know. Would you take that stance if you were given the chance to run it over again, or would you?
Advise such a good question. So this is the thing. This is what I said at the beginning, that this has been missold, misbranded as, from my perspective, it's been misbranded as, oh, it's a viral thing, it's a flu-like symptoms, most people are fine. The fact that you do not know, and fitness is not a part of it. There's no way to predict at the moment who's going to be fine and who isn't. There's likelihoods that people with cancer will be worse off than other people. But even people who, I know 2 people who got it and they used to run triathlons. And now, 9 weeks later, they're still at the same stage I'm at. These are not unfit people, Yeah. To be honest with you, before I got it, I was washing my hands because I have OCD anyway, so I'm obsessed with cleaning, to be honest, anyway. But before I got it, I kind of thought, well, if I get it, it's not going to be a big deal. I'll get immunity, get over and done with. And to be honest with you, I was kind of not upset at the thought of getting it, but I wasn't actively trying to get it, if that makes sense. I was protecting myself when I was washing my hands. I was doing everything that I was told to do, but I was not kind of worried at the thought of getting it. It wasn't something that was going, oh my God, if I do what, I wasn't doing active research into what it would be like. And then when I got it, the first few days I was like, yeah, it's a breeze, it's a flu, it's a this. And then literally the thing that scared me was that when my doctor friend said to me, because my doctor friends, to be honest, encouraged me to call the NHS, because I was like, we have this feeling at the moment that we can't burden the NHS. And you probably saw these articles about people not accessing the services, or kind of paramedics or people turning people away and going, oh, it's fine, you're fine, you'll be fine. It was that feeling that I don't want to disturb them. They have bigger, better cases than me. And my friend was a doctor. When she saw that I got fever on day 10, 11, whenever after the 48 hours that I thought I was fine, on day 11, 12, When she heard that I had fever then, she said to me, this is bad. You need to get yourself checked out. You have secondary infections you're not aware of. If she hadn't said that, I think I would have waited longer and longer. And the first doctor I spoke to at my surgery, she said, oh, you'll be fine. You're fine. Your breathing sounds fine on the phone. You're fine. Call us if you get worse. And then I called him the following day when my breathing got worse again. And that's when the different doctor said, I think you need to be assessed. Because it's concerning that it's been so long and it's getting worse rather than better. So I wouldn't recommend it as a try it out and see how it goes for you kind of situation. And I would say people need to be very, very careful with it, because the problem is that you can, from the moment you're well to the moment you're unwell, it's so fast, you don't even know where it hits you. This is the thing that I would say to be very, very wary about.
Yeah, and I guess a related question that I had to that is when you were affected, there were far fewer people that had been affected in the UK, less access to testing, many more unknowns. For people today, do you have any advice on or recommendations on how to go about it? It sounds like counting the days and being very astute about, if I've had a fever for 3 days, I need to knock down the door of my, on the phone, probably not in person,
5
but
days,
of my,
yes. 5 days.
Yeah. So what would you recommend? How should people be thinking about this if they're concerned about it today?
That's a good question. I like to always take a scientific approach as much as I can. I'm not a medical doctor, so take all of this with a pinch of salt. Yeah. But from my own personal research, and this whole conversation is from a personal perspective, I'm not a medical doctor. And from all the conversations I had with doctors, scientists, friends, because I'm in that sort of space, so I'm very lucky and privileged to have access to those sorts of people. The first thing I would say is that right now, wherever you want to get it online, get a pulse oximeter. A cheap one that I got was something called Contec. So it was really cheap, 22 quid or something like that. And it gives you that peace of mind. So from day one, the moment you start having fever, also take your pulse 3 times a day, take a reading on the pulse oximeter and write it down, literally in your diary, what time you took it and what the reading was. Blood pressure, heartbeats per minute, which is what the pulse oximeter tells you, and the oxygen level. If it's under 95, I would call a doctor anyway. If it's under 93, you need to call an ambulance. That's kind of the rule of thumb my doctor friend told me. The other thing I would do is buy a thermometer. I saw that I just got mine from Amazon just now. Not that I'm encouraging people to buy from Amazon, to be honest, but that's where I found the one that I could get quickly enough. I got a thermometer now because when the paramedics came, they asked me what my temperature had been for the last few days, and I hadn't had a thermometer, only a pulse oximeter, so I couldn't tell them. So again, it was much harder for them to predict what's going on because they couldn't see that chart. They couldn't see the map of day 1. This is what fever she had. Day 2. This is, so it would have been much more helpful, but it was helpful to them that I told them I had temperature from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And, so giving them a bit of an overview of what's been going on and make a note of your symptoms. So if you start having fever at 10 a.m. as soon as you realize you have fever, just make a note of that. And because that will help doctors decide much quicker the stage you're at. And if I knew this, I only started making real notes on day 3 because the first 2 days I wasn't quite sure this is it, And that's the thing that people don't realize is that you kind of start getting some symptoms, but you're not quite sure. And and that's why sometimes people are further along than they think because it just hit them. That's why I think that Saturday, it hit me within, 10 a.m. I was fine, 4 p.m. I couldn't breathe anymore. It was that sort of difference. So taking data and keeping a track of your symptoms and making a note of your symptoms, if God forbid it gets worse, you can tell doctors that, you can say to them, I've had fever for 3 days.
Right.
This is the fever. It was went up and down or the same consistent fever. It helps them understand because the other thing that my doctor friend said was that if fever comes and goes through the day, that's not good either. If fever is consistent for big chunks, right, that's much better because it means that the body is fighting, turning on the fire to burn the virus essentially. But if it's on and off, it's not a good sign, she said, and that you need to keep a very close eye on what's happening next.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, looking at other people's stories, to see if there's any, for me, that helps a lot to see if there's any resemblance. I calmed down a lot when I was taking my pulse oximeter readings and going, okay, I'm only 97. It's okay. My blood oxygen levels are 97. They're not 95. They're not 92. So I'm okay. And when I read this professor, which I can send you the link if you like, for the people listening to the podcast, they can read the article. It's quite short. There's a professor of contagious diseases, I think, and he got COVID as well 8 weeks ago as well. And he was saying how week 7, week 8, he's still struggling, and he's this kind of up and down curve as well. So that reading other people's stories kind of helps a little bit understand what's happening to you as well.
I think I might have seen you share this one. Yeah. Is this one that you shared on LinkedIn?
That's right.
I'm trying to remember the person's name as well. I can find the link for that one. We can include it in the description. I think it's super important to hear. We're inundated with statistics, and sometimes it's useful to hear individual perspectives on it because it makes it a little bit more real than just hearing the depressing numbers every day that don't really have any human stories attached to them. Do you, on the tracking side of things, have you started or did you in the past use any of the myriad of tracking apps that have been created that allow you to measure your symptoms or any of those sorts of things?
No, I hadn't done it before. That's what I'm saying. This kind of converted me a little bit. Because before I didn't quite see the point. I'm quite a healthy person in general. But when my doctor friend told me, I think she told me on day 3 to keep a track of my symptoms because they will help her make a decision to suggest various things. Then that's when I realized how it helps doctors make decisions. She showed me actually the charts of the way the protocols they have, at least in other countries. In the UK, there was no protocol at the time. of how to deal with
Right.
it, and how the more data the patient can give them, the faster and easier it is for them to make a decision that takes you down the right clinical path.
Right. That's good. That's very good advice. And I think people have one of the big themes of this podcast is actually talking to a lot of parents with children with rare disorders, people who themselves are affected. And this is COVID is a very unique class of it's no longer exactly a rare disease, and it's one of the most well-studied diseases in history relative to the amount of time it's been around. But still, you have to be armed with your own information, right? The health professionals are working hard out there, and they're doing the best they can, but they don't have the full context. You do, and so what you can really do to help them is to keep that information and keep it in an organized way, right?
Absolutely. And kind of knowing, so when paramedics came to our house, they were quite impressed because I showed them my phone with all the patterns of data and kind of what the readings had been. And they were quite like, oh gosh, this is more than we expected.
Impressed.
Yeah. And also, to be honest, you gain a little bit of professional respect at that point as well. Because they don't see you as this person who just has a bit of fever right now, or trying to guess what's happening to you.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Maybe a related, this just popped to mind, and it's sort of relevant to your professional role in advising companies. How do you think the next few months are going to play out in terms of? So people are going to continue to get it, and as easing happens in the UK and elsewhere, I think there are going to be a lot of questions from employers on, can you ask your employees to come back knowing that that's going to increase their risk of getting it? What do you have you formed any thoughts on that, of whether companies have a responsibility, in this government guidelines aside, to to think about how they handle this situation?
Gosh, you're full of good questions, Patrick. And I don't know if I'm qualified to answer all of them, but what I would say is this. One of the key things that I've seen, employers seem to have an expectation that even if their staff catch COVID, they should be okay within 2 weeks and come back within 2 weeks. Well, if I was employed anywhere, I would be off for 2 months at least. So I would be, First of all, this is the thing that I would like them to take into account as an employer. Imagine if, not the worst case scenario, imagine they get the moderate to severe symptoms, which is quite a good chunk of people. If you look at that chart that I shared as well from WHO, then your company will have these people missing in action for at least 2 months, and they'll come back being not great either by that point, to be honest. So first of all, as an employer, you have to think about a phased return to work. I mean, I couldn't, 2 weeks ago, so week 6, I could work an hour or 2 a day maximum. Week 7, I could work 3 hours a day maximum. Now week 8, I can work maximum 4 hours, but then the following day I can only do 2. If I've done 4 hours today, I can only do 2 tomorrow. So I would really look at the phased return to work. So that's the first thing I would say. Try and be realistic, because this can hit your staff a lot harder than you think. And some staff will carry it and not know anything about it, as we've seen as well. But in terms of returning to work, I mean, if I was employing people, obviously when you can work remotely, which I'm very lucky, my work can be done remotely, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. I would obviously still keep people working remotely as much as possible. And I know in the UK, there's a talk about, should we wear masks? Should we not wear masks? I know they're compulsory in other countries. You get a fine, apparently, if you go on the street without a mask. I was asked to wear a mask when I left the hospital. But I was told after a couple of weeks, I don't need to anymore. I would say a mask doesn't protect the person wearing the mask, as you know, protects the people around them. Yeah. So I would say that if I was an employer, I would ask everybody to wear a mask. Maybe see if you can get, transparent masks, where those were still protecting you, but also people can see your face through them. Because in hospital, it was very hard to tell who's talking to me and what exactly are they saying, because they were behind various screens.
Right.
And if I was deaf, I would have really struggled. And and I wasn't deaf, and I still struggled to understand what they were saying sometimes through all the protective equipment.
Absolutely. Do you worry personally at all about reinfection and those sorts of things as well? My understanding is they haven't really worked out whether I think the assumption is that you should be immune, and I, having not have it, am probably not immune. But I don't know that it's I think it's a little bit of an open question. Did they talk to you about that at all? Did they tell you to stay home and just in case, or did they say you're more or less protected if you want to be out and about?
They didn't say anything about that, but they were worried about me infecting other people. So to give you an example, when I left the hospital, they wouldn't let me go home with a taxi. It would only be a member of my family had to pick me up, or someone else that I knew for a fact that had COVID as much as possible, or I had to wait for an ambulance to take me home. And those are the only options I had. My boyfriend was very ill at the time with COVID himself. He had massive headaches, so he dropped me off at the hospital, but barely made it home himself. So I had, luckily, my ex-husband, who's still a very close friend, he was feeling better that day. He had one of his good days. So luckily he was able to pick me up from hospital and take me home. But that was the only concern they had. In terms of immunity, they didn't say anything because, again, I think it was so early. And even now, I think people don't know. However, I have hope that you might get immunity, at least for a few months or a year, because they're looking at doing tests with plasma of people who've recovered to help people who are not recovering.
Right.
And to me, that's an indicator, maybe a wrong idea. I'm not a medical professional again. But to me, that's an indicator that potentially there's something in there that says that you could potentially be immune, at least to some strands of it.
Yeah, the variety of different approaches to treat it are quite amazing. I've heard they're doing some of my understanding is basically your plasma, the antibodies can help fight somebody else's COVID. They're also thinking about these challenge trials that I imagine you might have a view on, which is where you effectively infect people, you vaccinate them, and then infect them with it. It's a more accelerated form of clinical trial for a vaccine because you don't wait for people to acquire it and measure, but you actually administer it directly. So I think we're going to have a lot of ethical debates as well around how do we conduct these things safely and appropriately. Have you considered donating plasma or been asked, or you probably want to wait until you're recovered fully to do that, I would guess?
Well, so the day I thought I was getting better, and one of my friends who works on that site at Addenbrooke's sent me the link because she knew I had it. And I was like, yay, I'm fine. The day I thought I was better 4 weeks ago, I applied to be one of the people who donates plasma already. And they rejected me because I had been abroad in France with work in less than 4 months. So apparently one of the conditions was that if you've been abroad in the last 4 months, you couldn't donate plasma. So I couldn't do it. I didn't qualify, unfortunately. And to be honest with you now, I'm not well enough to do it. I don't think I'm there yet either. I was fooled to think that I was at the time. But yeah.
Well, you can only trust what your body tells you, right? And if it's giving you mixed signals, then what can you do?
Exactly, mixed signals. That's the best way I could describe it. It's like, you're well. Oh, no, you're not. You're well. No, you're not. And I actually said to people, I feel like I'm a fake. Like, I feel like I'm lying to you. I told you this morning I'm fine, and now 3 hours later, I just want to sleep and nothing else. And everybody knows I'm an energetic, go-getting social person, and I've just become this person who just sits on the sofa or in bed 15 hours a day. That's ridiculous.
No, I can only imagine. I mean, it sounds clear to me that it's something wholly different than the flu. Few people get the flu and end up with 8 weeks of back and forth. Absolutely,
and some doctors told me it could be 12 weeks before I starting to feel human again consistently. So, right. And I had a really bad flu 2 years ago, and it's nothing like that. You know, with flu, you had fever, and you had dizziness and drowsiness and all these things, and you couldn't see light and all that. You had kind of you coughed and all that, but you didn't have this problem that you couldn't breathe properly. Like it's a feeling I've never had before. And I had really bad chest infections and bronchitis and all of that.
So just to close out here, I know I'm conscious of your time. I told you I'd keep it to 30 minutes and we've blasted right through it. And I know you've got a lot on. I was wondering if we could just close out by whether you have any viewpoint on what we could be doing from a society, government, maybe even science perspective that we aren't doing. Is there something that's, because the people who are making the decisions, with the exception of Boris Johnson, very few of them have been personally affected by it. So the experience is different. Is there something that you feel like is blindingly obvious that we should be doing or thinking about that just isn't part of the discourse? Or if you had a magic wand, you would you'd institute this overnight?
Well, if I had a magic wand, I would love, without real health repercussions, I would love to give the experience or the feeling, the knowledge of the experience that I have now to people who think it's just a flu. I mean, that's the first thing I would do if I had a magic wand. People underestimate, and it's very hard to understand how bad this can be for you or your family. My boyfriend was fine, but I wasn't. He worries even now about me. I mean, yesterday, to give you an honest answer, I went for a walk with him for an hour. I nearly passed out in the street on the way back several times. I had to sit down on every bench on the way home and have a half an hour break. So the walk took us 4 hours in the end or something to actually get back, because I couldn't get back. And obviously you can't get a taxi. You can't get a lift from anybody else, because you're not meant to be sharing those sort of things. So one of the things I would say is that think not just about yourself. If you think, oh, I'll be fine, but think about your mother, your brother, your grandma, I don't know, anyone else that you might be affecting. I think the thing that people don't realize, and I hear some people go, oh, you're stopping me from living my life. The problem I think people don't realize is that we are impacting everyone else's life. It's not just your own, but it's everyone else's. And I don't think that's understood deeply enough by people who haven't had it yet and haven't suffered from it. And I don't have any magic bullet, but that's the key thing I would say, that if we were to have the empathy of what it's like to have it, and not have it critical case, which is basically ICU, intensive care unit, but actually have a moderate to severe case like I had, believe me, you would change your mind. I changed my mind. Before I got it, I was quite lax about it in the sense of, well, I'm upset if I get it. And now I'm like, this is not the flu. This has been missold.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing, rather than any specific policy change or something like that. If we can inject some empathy through the system, then probably people will that will trickle down into specific policies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. I just want to say thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time to do it. If I know you've been sharing some of your experiences on Twitter, LinkedIn. Is there somewhere people can follow you that's not Facebook and super personal? Can people follow you on LinkedIn to see your updates and those sorts of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Connect with me on LinkedIn as well. On LinkedIn and Twitter, I'm very open about this. I want people to know what it's like. This is why I've been extremely open about my personal experience, because I think people need to understand this is not a joke. This is not a drill. Yeah.
Very much not a drill. Maybe that could be the title of the podcast. This is not a drill. We'll see. Okay. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope your recovery continues well. It seems like it is. You're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, and it's getting better. If not day by day, at least week by week, it's making progress.
Yeah, the overall trajectory is better. I would say the overall trajectory. It's just day by day, it's extremely fluctuating immensely.
Well, perfect. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think people appreciate hearing your perspective.
Thank you so much. And if anybody wants to follow me, it's Adelina Chalmers on LinkedIn and on Twitter as well, or the Geek Whisperer. If you Google Adelina Chalmers, the Geek Whisperer, you shall find me.